Most people think medieval knights were these noble guys fighting for honor and their kings. But there was one man who spent his entire life telling the most powerful rulers in Europe to go to hell, and he actually got away with it. His name was Gotz von Berlichingen, and he had a metal hand. Not because it looked cool, but because that's all he had left after years of warfare. What makes his story so wild is that he didn't just exist during this time. He actively fought back against the system that was trying to crush him. He became the kind of guy that kings and emperors feared, not because he was the strongest fighter, but because he represented something they couldn't control. This is the story of how one man with nothing but a castle, some soldiers, and pure determination managed to stand against an entire empire. Let me take you back to the late 1400s in the German territories. This wasn't Germany like we know it today. It was a fractured mess of hundreds of kingdoms, principalities, and city-states, all competing for power. The Holy Roman Emperor ruled over it all. But real power was spread everywhere. Kings had armies. Rich merchants had armies. Sometimes even the church had armies. In this world, if you had a castle and some men, you could make a living. And that's exactly what Gotz did. His family, the Berlichingens, had controlled a small territory in what's now southern Germany for generations. They weren't royalty, but they had enough land and enough soldiers to matter. When Gotz came of age in the 1480s, he did what every young nobleman did. He went to war. But he wasn't fighting for some grand cause. He was fighting for whoever paid him. He worked as a soldier for hire, taking jobs from different lords and princes. This was completely normal at the time. If you could fight and you had a reputation, you could make money. But here's where things get interesting. Gotz wasn't just some random guy swinging a sword around. He was good. Really good. He became known as one of the most skilled fighters in the region. This meant he started taking bigger jobs and working for more important people. This also meant he started making enemies. A lot of them. By the time he was in his 30s, Gotz had fought in so many conflicts that he'd lost count. He'd been in battles for territorial disputes, castle raids, and feuds between noble families. Then, in 1504, something changed everything. He was fighting in a siege when a cannonball caused him to lose his right hand. This would have ended most men's careers. Not Gotz. He got a metal hand made. Not a fancy prosthetic like you might imagine. It was functional. An iron hand that he could clamp and use to grip things. It was designed for warfare. And with that iron hand, he went right back to fighting. This metal hand became his signature. People started calling him Gotz with the iron hand. It wasn't just a nickname, it was a warning. When you heard that name, you knew exactly who you were dealing with. For the next several years, Gotz did what he'd always done. He took contracts, fought battles, and expanded his influence. He was becoming richer and more powerful. But he was also stepping on more toes. He was raiding territories, attacking merchants, and basically doing whatever made him money. He was not a villain in his own mind. He was just playing the game that everyone else was playing. The only difference was that he was winning, but the game was changing. The Holy Roman Emperor, particularly under Emperor Maximilian, was trying to consolidate power and bring order to the chaos. They wanted to stop guys like Gotz, guys who operated outside their control, guys who could raise armies and do whatever they wanted. Around 1512, Gotz made a move that would shape the rest of his life. He captured a knight named Schott and held him for ransom. This wasn't unusual. Ransoming captured enemies was a normal part of medieval warfare. But the problem was that Schott was connected to powerful people. When the emperor found out, he was furious. The emperor declared that Gotz had broken the peace and needed to be punished. For the next few years, Gotz found himself hunted. The emperor sent armies after him. Other nobles joined in because they didn't want to be on the wrong side of the emperor's power. His lands were attacked. His allies abandoned him. What happened next was a siege that lasted for months. The emperor's forces surrounded Gotz's castle and tried to starve him out, but Gotz refused to give up. He held his position with his remaining soldiers, and he didn't surrender. Eventually, through negotiations, a deal was made. Gotz agreed to stop his raiding, and the emperor agreed to let him live. It wasn't great for Gotz, but it was better than execution. But here's the thing about Gotz: he couldn't stay quiet for long. Over the next decade, he got involved in more conflicts. He was hired by various lords and princes to fight in their wars. He was still that valuable military asset everyone wanted on their side. But he was also still breaking rules, still attacking, still doing things that bothered the people in power. By the 1520s, Germany was in chaos. There was religious conflict brewing. There was social unrest. Peasants were starting to organize and demand better treatment from their lords. And in the middle of all this, Gotz was still doing his thing, fighting, raiding, and refusing to accept the authority of the people above him. This is when something unexpected happened. The peasants started to see Gotz as a symbol of resistance. Here was this guy with an iron hand who'd been fighting against the system his whole life. The peasants, who were being crushed by taxes and unfair treatment, saw him as someone who understood what it meant to stand up against power. They wanted him to lead them. In 1525, during the German Peasants' War, Gotz actually agreed to lead a peasant army. It seems like a strange choice for a nobleman who had spent his whole life fighting for rich people. But maybe it made sense to Gotz. Maybe he saw it as just another fight against authority. Maybe he genuinely sympathized with the peasants. We don't really know what was going on in his head. The peasant army was a disaster, though. They weren't trained soldiers like Gotz's mercenary forces. They didn't have the discipline or the experience. They were crushed by the army set against them. Gotz was captured and imprisoned for the role he'd played. After his release, Gotz lived quietly for a while. He was older now. His best fighting days were behind him. He'd spent his whole life refusing to bow to anyone, and it had cost him everything. His lands were taken away, his power was gone, but he never apologized. He never said he was sorry for the things he'd done. He never renounced his defiance. He lived the rest of his life as a testament to the idea that you could resist, even if the system was bigger than you, even if you'd ultimately lose. Gotz von Berlichingen died in 1562. By that time, the world had changed completely. The feudal system was breaking down. Strong centralized states were replacing the chaos of hundreds of competing powers. Guys like Gotz, who were independent operators who answered to no one, were becoming obsolete. But he left behind something more valuable than any conquest or treasure. He left behind the idea that one person could stand against an entire system and never back down. He refused to accept the authority of emperors and kings. He lived by his own code, and even when that code cost him everything, he didn't compromise. Historians and writers got so interested in Gotz that they turned his story into plays and books. The most famous was a German play written by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe in the 1770s. Goethe made Gotz a symbol of individual freedom fighting against an unjust system. It became one of the most important pieces of German literature. That's how powerful his story was. It inspired one of history's greatest writers. The real Gotz was probably more complicated than Goethe's version. He was a raider and a mercenary. He wasn't a hero in the modern sense. But he was a man who lived his entire life on his own terms, and that's something worth remembering. So what's the lesson here? It is that there is something powerful about a person who refuses to be broken by the system around them. Gotz had everything taken from him, his power, his lands, his position, but he never stopped being himself. He never let anyone make him feel small.